Welcome to the Bluffton Biblecast, where together we dive into this week's Bible reading. Join us as we seek to understand the Word more fully so we can live by it more faithfully. Thanks for listening in. I'm Mike Lisey, and I'm joined by Miranda Craighead and Todd Dreher, with Tiffany Tonner running the sound.
And we would like to thank each listener for joining us again as we work our way through the parables.
Yeah, this week we will read about the parable of the sower on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then on Thursday and Friday we will read parables about being ready and watchful.
Like Mike said, this week we read the parable of the sower. You know, although Jesus calls it the parable of the sower, the focus seems to be on the soils, since the sower is doing the same thing each time, but the outcome differs depending on the 4 different soils. But anyway, most of us could recite this parable by heart. So instead of going into what Jesus is teaching in it, I think it'd be really interesting to go into why this parable is significant as it relates to the rest of the parables as a whole.
I think that's a great idea, Miranda. Some people would argue that this parable is really important and is a guide to understanding the rest of the parables.
Yeah, explain that a bit, Todd.
Sure. Well, first, it occurs in all 3 synoptic gospels.
Synoptic meaning Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right?
Yeah, right. And it's one of 2 parables that Jesus gives an interpretation of.
That makes sense. If I'm not mistaken, it's also the first major recorded parable in each gospel?
Yeah, you're right. And with that said, this one kicks it off by helping us better understand how Jesus sees the rest of his parables.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. In Mark 4:13, Jesus states, "Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all parables?" He seems to be setting the stage because in the passages that follow, Jesus gives many more parables back to back.
Right. So Jesus seems to be emphasizing listening and understanding, and basically saying, if you can't follow the sower, you're going to have a hard time grasping the rest of what I'm about to share with you.
Mm-hmm. Todd, I wonder how many of the people who had heard Jesus' teachings could actually follow the spiritual lesson behind it.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, most of them, if not all of them, probably understood what he was saying in the literal sense, as the audience consisted of many farmers, or at least those who were around farming. Maybe some of them could have been thinking, yeah, of course the seed doesn't grow near as well in the wayside stones and thorns as it does good soil. It may not have even crossed their minds that Jesus was even talking about their hearts.
Right. I mean, even the disciples had to ask what it meant. So definitely others wouldn't have completely understood. Although only God knows how many of those people took the parables to heart.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we can only hope that many understood this parable and his many to follow. Mike, what are your thoughts on this reading, particularly when the disciples ask Jesus why he uses parables rather than the interpretation in the first place?
In between the parable and the interpretation, the disciples asked Jesus why he uses parables, and Jesus answered them, saying, "The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise they might turn and be forgiven."
Whew. I feel like this is hard. When I read it, it sounds like Jesus doesn't want them to understand, like he's hiding the truth from them.
It does sound like that, but let's take a closer look at this passage. Jesus is actually quoting Isaiah 6:9, where Isaiah is to tell Israel the exact same message. Did Isaiah also not desire that Israel turn back to God?
I don't think so.
We know that God desires that all men be saved, so why would Jesus quote this?
Well, rather than condemnation, this might have been a way of shocking the people, pointing out the end result of not listening and not understanding. So here's an example for you. Sometimes the gas light in our van comes on and the tank is on E, but my wife makes a comment like, I think I can run to Walmart and back before filling up with gas. And then I respond with the same type of statement. You're going to run out of gas and be stranded on the side of the road. So I'm making a statement of doom so that she will stop at the gas station and prevent problems.
Oh, I see. So Jesus might be proclaiming the dangers of not listening, trying to get the people to respond.
Exactly, Mike. Jesus' first word in this parable is listen, and it ends by saying, "He that has ears to hear, let him hear," which ties right into this quote. He is imploring people to listen to the truth so that the word will grow.
You know, the Jeremiah Study Bible might help shed a little light here on Jesus' intent. A basic parable takes something that is understood like a simple story or word picture and uses it to illustrate a truth that is not understood. In essence, a teacher using a parable is saying, "You don't understand what I'm saying? Okay, it's like this." In a parable, something well known is brought alongside a truth to make it clear.
However, sometimes Jesus uses parables for the opposite purpose, to hide the truth from the spiritually prideful. God had closed the spiritual eyes and ears of many in Israel because of sin, and as a result, most Jewish leaders didn't recognize Jesus when his earthly ministry began. For them, his words were kind of like a foreign language, so he often spoke in parables so that the Jewish leaders didn't hear the truth, which was of no interest to them anyhow.
By teaching in parables, Jesus both illuminated the hearts of the spiritually sensitive and frustrated the minds of the spiritually blind. The same parable could be a blessing or a curse, depending on the mindset of the person who was listening. If I really think about it, it would appear that our individual attitudes determine what truths we can discern from the parables of Jesus.
Exactly. The very fact that he was teaching the multitudes tells us that he wants those who are seeking God to hear and understand.
Jesus' parable of the faithful and wise steward in Luke 12:41 through 48 gives us an eye-opening glimpse of God's judgment parameters that will be used when mankind stands before him at the end of the age. Any thoughts on this topic, Miranda?
Well, to set the stage, in Romans 1:20, Paul states that the revelation of God in nature alone has communicated enough about God's existence and attributes to make humans responsible for what they see. That is why he writes that humanity is without excuse.
Good point, Miranda. Jesus' parable of the faithful and wise steward establishes the principle of proportional judgment. And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know, yet committed things deserving of stripes, shall be beaten with few. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required, and to whom much has been committed, of him they shall ask the more.
Wow! According to Revelation 20, verses 11 through 15, when God judges humanity at the end of the age, it will be absolutely just. From the leader of a mega-Christian denomination who has been given all tools needed for a born-again lifestyle, to the poor slave in the jungles of Africa who never heard the gospel message, their eternal destiny will be based on what talents, gifts, enlightenment, and resources was given to them, and how he or she responded with using them.
So in summing up this parable, guys, I think we can determine that all people are responsible for their knowledge of God, whether little or great. While willful disobedience to God will receive severe punishment, unintentional disobedience will receive less punishment. From James 3:1, we discern that Christian leaders and teachers must remain especially aware that theirs is a greater responsibility. In closing this week's podcast, we ask you to ponder this thought. What condition would you say that your heart is in to receive the seed God sows?
Right. And are we prepared to act on what we know?
We hope that this episode is as much of a blessing to you as it has been for us, and we trust that the scriptures will inspire all of us to dig even deeper. Have a blessed week.